All right. So, hello everyone and welcome. I just wanted to share this presentation that I made on a larger work that I'm doing on somatically unsettling and imagining Indigenous regeneration. So, we want to acknowledge the lands, the Indigenous lands that we're on. I'm currently on Coast Salish lands, and we invite you to acknowledge the lands that you're on, and then the original stewards of these lands, and to hold that peace in our hearts, and to hold that acknowledgement in our hearts. And when I say peace, I mean stewardship, and I mean wisdom that people are seeking. And I'll get more into the process of facing everything that's happened in between that, but initially it's just acknowledging that there are original stewards of every land that we're on, that anyone's on, and to acknowledge that and to sit with that. And I can post into the description below a website that you can go to find out. Peoples have been compiling information, and a lot of it will ask for verification because borders have been a fluid thing, and so it's not 100% accurate, especially because living landscapes don't completely translate onto two-dimensional maps. And how experiential knowledge is different than a knowledge that is disconnected from its participation and its implications. And so I'll share this website in the description if you want to know, if you don't know and you want to know. And then also in the search of, okay, if I'm not currently living on lands who my ancestors stewarded, then where are my ancestral lands? And it can become a lifelong journey to investigate and research that. And so we're working on our own methodology to share with people, and we'd love to hear about your journey as well, your process. If you want to share in the comments or email us. Yeah, so some of my ancestral lands are Sapmi, Air. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce them. I'm still going through the process, very much so, in making connections, finding connections, and then making connections. And also with my ancestral lands of Spain, the Americas, and England. That feels like a starting point, but because languages have been destroyed and forgotten and buried and burned, those are not necessarily the indigenous names. And so I want to acknowledge that, but to say that that can be a starting place. And then, even if you don't know, that's also part of the process too. And there are many layers to this, as there are many layers of identity and relationships. And so, as yeah, I'm going to be sharing my process, because even with DNA tests and things like that, they're only really a step in the journey. Um, and they can definitely be questioned because they can change based on the period of time and the bank of DNA that's it's relative. It's completely relative to the time you're getting tested. So for now, there's different approaches that people can take. There can be like an approach based on resonance and reimagination, and those are often necessary because we're alive, and knowledge is a living thing, and when it's seen as a living thing, then we can become more embodied in the process of our imagination and how we approach Indigenous regeneration. So there's a lot to this, and I'm not attempting to cover everything in this presentation. I'm just want to share a little bit of what I've been working on the past few months. So first, I want to invite you to hold your thumbs and listen to their pulse and feel their pulse. And so like I said, I'll be sharing my processes in somatically unsettling and imagining Indigenous regeneration. And as identity emerges through relationships, through the layers of relationships, holding our thumbs supports us to let go of anything blocking us in order for life to emerge in the present moment. Holding our thumbs supports identity transformation and thus relationship transformation. And so it relates to how we're interconnected for the journey of life to be embraced, and how we emerge through and with our relationships. And because every breath offers new life to emerge, take a deep breath, and we're going to keep holding our thumbs this whole time. I want to share a little bit about where things have become distorted in our shared humanity while still holding my thumb. So, if you haven't heard of Linnaeus, he was a European scientist and he developed this particular classification system of race in the 1750s. So let me know if you're familiar in the comments with the four humors. It's actually not funny. Europeans were scientifically endorsing and practicing this framework. They were saying that skin color was related to humors, and the classifications of humors were, as you can see on the top, second to the left column here, there's yellow bile. Humors consist of yellow bile, black bile, phlegm, and blood. And so they believed that those humors were what gave people the color of their skin, and that they actually believed through their Eurocentric bias that light white skin meant an absence of disease, and that was actually something people should strive for in their health. And so I just want to preface that with the distortion of a little bit of the history of racism that is entangled with the medical system, it is entangled within people's ideologies within the medical system. And so considering that that is not true, considering that our colors and that our hues as humans do not come from a lack of health. And so this has been one of many ways to delegitimize Black doctors and Indigenous doctors' worldviews and healing practices. A few years ago, I was working with a Celtic dream worker, June Blue Spruce, who is a retired nurse in Seattle. And she was talking about in early American history how Black doctors would treat the whole person and how this threatened white doctors' limited institutional framework. And so the white doctors gatekept the Black doctors out and continued to legally demonize and discriminate against Indigenous healers until the Indian Religious Freedom Act in 1978. Gotta keep pulling my thumbs. There's a lot to be said about the information here. So then I ask myself, because I've been told to identify as white as a child, and I know that whiteness swallows cultures and erases cultures, and it has absorbed groups of peoples. So my inquiry has been around, who am I as a human? We see that this individualism and this separation from Earth, this illusion that humans can dominate the Earth, is very Eurocentric. It's a very Eurocentric white ideology that in part has come from the Cartesian split between mind and body. Whereas the idea of being in reciprocity with the Earth is more Indigenous. So my search has been how to connect with my Indigenous ancestors. How can I learn from them as they make up the landscape of my body? And from all of these different places, how can I harmonize that within myself? Because whiteness claims superiority scientifically. If I identify as white, my whiteness will not allow me to question my investment in whiteness, because in that ideology, whiteness is pure and superior. And so once whiteness swallows you up, you're white. But if I were to feel into my roots and into remembering who I came from, who I come from, the landscapes that I come from, the people who were in close reciprocity with the land, that is not white. That existed before these classifications that rely on oppressing Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Because without them, without oppressing them, whiteness wouldn't even survive. So this has been my inquiry around questioning, well then who am I as a human? Who am I as a person of color? Who am I as someone seeking processes for imagining Indigenous regeneration? So much of my ancestral cosmologies, like I said, have been literally burned. And because the nature of being in reciprocity with the land is an embodied, multilateral, and cyclical experience, it draws in the imagination and requires the embodiment of our imagination to be fully engaged. You can keep pulling your thumbs if you want to. So while acknowledging that delusional white supremacy is still alive today, and that this is something I have close proximity to because of my light skin, how can I respond to this delusion? I think that practices like Jin Shinjutsu from Japan, Qigong and Tai Chi, Ayurveda, many different practices around the world, they may not have emerged from the landscapes of my ancestral lineage, but I still see them as gifts to humanity that can support me in finding and developing and reimagining and regenerating that reciprocity within myself, with other seekers, and with the more than human world. Yeah. One of my readings on an essay titled Emergent Landscapes talks about, on the left here, the old paradigm of linearity and dominating the landscape, as opposed to seeing things on the right as interconnected frameworks and living organisms. And this just offers an opportunity to reframe. So continuing from that, the objects are then seen as relationships. Excuse me. Interactions and processes. Parts are moved into wholes, into their wholes existing within other wholes and wholes. Hierarchies are moved into networks nested within other networks, with each successive layer of network showing emergent properties. Self-assertion, the need to be assertive or right or dominating, moves into being integrated, where we're not debating to prove a point, to have superiority, but we're learning how to listen deeper. We're learning how to gain more understanding of where each other are coming from, and to honor each other's lived experiences and languages, as there are many languages even within the English language. And then superstructure moves into a world without ground, as, and I interpret this as the ground being a living organism. It can have a fluctuating state. Perhaps we acknowledge the necessity to cultivate our internal and external soils. And so, as this is kind of a glimpse into my processes, ultimately it's coming back to my crafting practice and how crafting in its many different forms and techniques, how the process of crafting offers a really practical and literal avenue to re-engage with our Indigenous lineages. While there's a lot of research that can be involved in and like relationship building involved in making those connections to really understand what that means, to learn how to be in, to remember how to be in reciprocity. And when it comes to this like embodiment, I think crafting in terms of, well, there's so many different crafting. There's woodworking, there's this shaping of materials. I'm specifically talking about costumes and garments and the things that we wear on our bodies, and working with what we have and where we're at, and accepting that as a part of the process of undoing these colonial systems of patriarchy and racism and capitalism. We're undoing those and remembering what does it mean to be embodied and in reciprocity, where we're not relying on the enslavement of other peoples, because it harms them, but it also harms ourselves. Are we just buying into somebody else's dream, or are we actually living our dream and engaging with the process of dreaming and the cycles? So you're welcome to visit my website. I share my crafts. One of the collections I've been working on is rhizomatic threads, which is a continuum collection of living garments where the internal and external landscapes are bridged through dance and harmonics. So that's when listening deeper to our inner voices, being able to hear the voice behind the voice, behind the voice, behind the voice, is like this poetic language that lives inside of each of us. It really speaks to our, like the poetry of our soul is so integrated. If we could remember how to hear it and remember how to express it in ways that it can be heard and received. And through this, the bridge between indigeneity, And then in colonization, it becomes the threads, and the threads become the bridge. And so I do want to be careful with the term indigeneity, because I don't, it has to be an act. It has to be in motion. If a person is going to be claiming indigeneity, they need to know what constitutes indigeneity. And they have to hear from their own elders, from their own specific origins, what does that mean? And I know some of my Indigenous elders in Ireland at the Celtic Druid Temple, I read on their website that they have a whole list of things that constitute as somebody claiming their indigeneity. Part of it is someone who is actively learning Gaelic, their native tongue, their ancestors' language. Part of it is stewarding the lands. I don't live in Ireland right now, but how can I? And that comes back to honoring and acknowledging the lands that I currently am, and listening to the peoples here. And so there's a lot of dimensions to this, and I know some people say that you really can't claim. Personally, I feel like if I'm actively seeking Indigenous identity and reimagining Indigenous identity and reconnecting with Indigenous identity, then that's a lifelong process. I would rather say I'm seeking that cultivation than I'm Indigenous, because I feel like I'm very much in the process. And so we've just shared part of where we're at with you, and here's some of our garments. There's also more videos that I've created on actually the act of crafting. This is more of some of the embodiment. These are all garments that I've recreated from themselves, or they've recreated themselves through me. And rhizomatic threads implies that there's crossover, and two things might become one thing, or might take a little bit of something and bring it with another thing. Might just do a bunch of darning or embroidery. Might make a patchwork. And then down here, our way could go to shop, and because the framework of our collections is to center the luxury and medicine of crafting, we're centering access to crafting in our videos. We've made lots of videos. We're going to continue making videos of crafting. And then on the outside is um, is where, and that's all free. The videos are free. So sharing the access to our processes is the most open access. And then when our values are centered around that, then the work and the labor that I do to share with people is where like the higher prices come in, because that people who can afford that, people who value that and want to bring that into their lives, who appreciate the labor and the values that I'm centering, then they can buy those garments and they can embody that themselves. And then in that, they're supporting the access to creating this and sharing this medicine with people. And then I also work with people who want more closer engagement with like cultivating their crafting practice too, and working with the garments that they have in their wardrobes. So it's definitely of value, and it's definitely a devotion practice. And it's definitely something that is divesting from white ideology and reinvesting into the reciprocity between our internal and our external worlds. And I think that that is where our dreams can really materialize. So yeah, there's a lot to identity, and it goes even beyond relationships with humans into all the peoples in the more than human world, the plant peoples, the rock peoples, all of the elements, and the materials themselves. When I say that they materialize or they tell their story through me, because I listen to them, and it's that kind of process of imagination that is what I'm centering. It's not on a product. It's on a process and a way of being. And so, welcome and thank you. Blessings for your journey, and may we continue seeking